I want you to take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Find a comfortable place, maybe with a warm drink, and just listen for a while. We are going on a journey today. It's a journey inward, but also a journey backward. We are going to walk through the hallways of our family history, not to assign blame, but to understand. To find the keys to rooms we didn't know were locked. Imagine for a moment that you are a house. You have your own walls, your own windows, your own unique architecture. But beneath the floorboards, behind the plaster, there are wires. Wires that were laid long before you moved in. These wires carry the current for your lights, for your heating. When you flip a switch, you expect a certain reaction. But what if the wiring is old? What if it was installed by someone who lived through a storm, who wired the house to protect itself from floods that no longer come, or to brace against winds that have long since passed? You flip the switch for joy, and for a moment, a shadow flickers. You flip the switch for anger, and the whole house shakes with a force far greater than the situation warrants. This, my friend, is the landscape of emotional inheritance. It is the invisible architecture of our reactions, the ghost in the blood that shapes our lives from the shadows. We like to think of ourselves as blank slates, as the authors of our own stories, starting from chapter 1 on the day we were born. But the truth is far more mysterious and far more beautiful. We are not the first chapter. We are the latest chapter in a story that has been running for generations. And the characters who came before us, they didn't just leave us their eyes or their hair color. They left us their silences. They left us their survival strategies. They left us their unprocessed pain. Let's start with a simple story. Think of a grandmother you may have known, or perhaps a great-grandmother you've only seen in photographs. Let's call her Ilara. Ilara lived through a time of great scarcity. Perhaps it was a war, a great economic depression, or a personal loss that left her alone and struggling. In those times, survival required a certain set of rules. You didn't waste food, not a single crumb. You didn't express your needs too loudly because there was no one to meet them. You learned to be small, to be quiet, to be invisible because being seen was dangerous. You learned to hold your emotions tight in your chest because if you let them out, they might break you, and you had to stay whole just to make it to the next day. Ilara didn't just survive, she built a life. She raised children, but she never spoke of those hard times. The memories were too painful, locked away in a vault. But she didn't need words to teach her lessons. Her children learned from watching her. They saw the way she would wrap a half-eaten piece of bread in a napkin and hide it in her pocket, just in case. They felt the tension in the room when someone asked for something extra, a new toy, a second helping. They absorbed the unspoken rule. There is not enough. You must be careful. You must not want too much. Her daughter, let's call her Maya, grew up in a house of relative comfort. The war was over. The depression was a memory. But Maya didn't know comfort. She knew a deep, pervasive anxiety about money, even when there was plenty. She felt a knot in her stomach whenever she spent money on herself, a voice whispering, "You are being selfish. This is reckless." Maya was living with her mother's wiring. The house had been built for a storm that had passed, but the circuit breakers were still set to trip at the slightest gust of wind. Maya, in turn, had a daughter. Her name is Sarah, and Sarah is you, or me, or anyone listening to this story. Sarah grew up watching her mother, Maya. Maya was a good mother. She provided, she loved, but Sarah also felt that knot. She saw her mother's face tighten when the credit card bill arrived. She heard the deep sighs when an unexpected expense came up. Sarah didn't need to be told there was a monster in the world. She could feel her mother's heart racing whenever the subject of money arose. And so Sarah, living in a time of relative abundance, with a good job and a stable life, finds herself lying awake at 3 a.m., paralyzed with fear about her finances. Her bank account is healthy, but her soul is bankrupt with a terror that belongs to her grandmother, Ilara, who once hid bread in her pocket. This is the invisible architecture. This is the unspoken pattern. It is not taught in words. It is transmitted in glances, in silences, in the tension of a jaw, in the sudden coldness in a room when a certain topic arises. It is the trauma that becomes our default setting. But it's not just about money. Emotional inheritance colors every corner of our lives. Think about conflict. In some families, when a disagreement arises, the volume rises. Voices are weapons. Anger is the only acceptable emotion, a fiery shield that protects a deeper, softer hurt. If you grew up in that house, you might find yourself, as an adult, screaming at a partner over a misplaced set of keys. The intensity of your reaction is a ghost. It is the echo of every unresolved argument your parents had, every time they used rage to feel powerful when they felt powerless. You inherited their anger as a default setting because, in that house, it was the only tool available to handle a threat. Have you ever felt like you're carrying emotions that aren't entirely your own? Maybe it's a persistent anxiety, a quick temper, or a deep-seated sadness that seems to have no clear origin in your own life experiences. What if I told you these feelings might not have started with you? Welcome to the fascinating world of inherited emotional patterns. Recent scientific research, particularly in the field of epigenetics, is revealing something incredible. Emotional trauma can be passed down through generations. This isn't about blaming our parents or grandparents. It's about understanding that their unresolved pain, their coping mechanisms, and their emotional responses to major life events can leave an imprint on our DNA. Think of it like this. Your ancestors' experiences might have tagged certain genes, making you more susceptible to specific emotional reactions, like anxiety or depression. So how do you know if you're dealing with inherited patterns? A great first step is to become an emotional detective in your own family. Look at your family tree not just for names and dates, but for stories and feelings. What were the major challenges your parents, grandparents, and even great-grandparents faced? Were there wars, migrations, sudden losses, or financial hardships? How did they cope? You might notice similar emotional themes cropping up across generations. Maybe your grandmother was always worried about money, and now you find yourself with a constant, unexplainable financial anxiety, even when you're stable. Or perhaps a history of unspoken grief has left a legacy of emotional distance in your family. Recognizing these patterns is the first powerful step toward breaking the cycle. Once you've identified a potential inherited pattern, what's next? The key is to differentiate what is yours from what you've inherited. A powerful technique for this is mindful awareness. When a strong emotion comes up, instead of getting swept away by it, pause and ask yourself, is this feeling truly mine? Does it fit the current situation, or does it feel bigger, older? This simple question can create a space between you and the emotion, giving you the power to choose your response instead of reacting automatically. Journaling is another amazing tool. Write down your feelings without judgment. Explore where you think they might come from. You could even write a letter to the ancestor you believe you inherited the emotion from. You don't have to send it, of course. The act of writing is about acknowledging the connection, expressing compassion for their struggle, and respectfully giving the emotion back, declaring that their story is not your story. Healing also involves creating new, positive emotional experiences. This is where you actively rewrite the script. If your family legacy is one of anxiety, consciously practice moments of peace and gratitude. If it's a pattern of anger, cultivate patience and compassion. You can do this through meditation, spending time in nature, or engaging in hobbies that bring you joy. You are essentially building new neural pathways, teaching your brain and your body a different way to be. Somatic practices can be incredibly effective too. Inherited trauma is often stored in the body. Activities like yoga, tai chi, or even just deep, conscious breathing can help release this stored tension. When you feel that old, familiar tightness in your chest, or knot in your stomach, breathe into it. Imagine the tension loosening with each exhale. This helps your nervous system regulate and return to a state of calm, signaling to your body that the old danger has passed. Remember, this journey is not about erasing your family's history. It's about honoring it while freeing yourself from the burdens that are not yours to carry. It's about taking the strength and resilience your ancestors passed down and leaving the pain behind. By healing yourself, you're not only transforming your own life, but you're also stopping the pattern from continuing. You become what we call a cycle breaker, creating a healthier emotional legacy for the generations that will come after you. This can be deep and sometimes challenging work. If you find that these emotions are overwhelming, please consider seeking support from a therapist who specializes in generational trauma or family systems. They can provide a safe space and professional guidance to help you navigate this process. You don't have to do it alone. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration today. If this resonated with you, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you noticed any emotional patterns in your own family? I'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe for more content on personal growth and healing. Until next time, take care. To heal this, you have to look at that inner critic and see its origin. That harsh voice in your head? it's not your voice. It's a recording. It's the voice of your grandfather who never felt good enough. It's the fear in your mother's eyes when you stumbled. It's the accumulated anxiety of a family that believed love was conditional on performance. When you recognize it as a recording, you can change the channel. You can consciously choose a new voice. A voice of compassion. A voice that says, when you make a mistake, it's okay. You are human. You are learning. You are still worthy of love, of peace, of rest. At first, this new voice will feel foreign. It will feel weak against the roar of the inherited critic. But with practice, it grows stronger. You are rewiring the house. You are laying new cables. You are building a new, conscious architecture based on self-acceptance, not on fear. This is the journey from being a passive recipient of a legacy to becoming its conscious author. We move from this is just the way I am to this is the way I learned to be, and I can choose to learn something new. Think of the patterns you might carry around love and connection. If your family history is marked by loss, perhaps a great-grandparent died young, leaving a spouse and children in devastating grief, you might carry an unspoken fear of attachment. A fear that if you love too deeply, you will be left. You might find yourself sabotaging relationships just as they start to get good, pushing people away before they can leave you. You are living out a loyalty to that ancient grief. Your subconscious mind whispers, if I don't get too close, I won't get hurt like great-grandma did. Healing this requires a radical act of faith. It requires you to look at that old grief and say, I am so sorry for your loss. It was devastating. But I am living in a different time. I have the capacity to love and to risk loss, and I choose to love. I choose to stay. I will not let your tragedy become the blueprint for my loneliness. This process also involves looking at the positive legacies. It's not all shadows and pain. Perhaps you inherited a deep well of resilience from a great-grandfather who crossed an ocean with nothing but hope. Maybe you inherited a fierce sense of justice from an ancestor who stood up against unfairness. You inherited a love of music, of storytelling, of the ocean. These are also part of the emotional inheritance. The architecture isn't just faulty wiring. It's also the beautiful stained glass windows that cast colorful light into the rooms of our lives. As we do this work, we must honor those gifts as well. We keep the windows, we just update the wiring. So how do we do this work in a practical, day-to-day way? It's a practice, not a one-time fix. It's a way of living with more awareness. First, create a pause. In the heat of a strong emotional reaction, when you feel that disproportionate surge of anger, fear, or shutdown, just stop. Don't act. Don't speak. Just breathe. This pause is the most powerful tool you have. In that single second of pause, you are interrupting the ancient pattern. You are inserting yourself into the automatic loop. Second, get curious. In that pause, ask yourself a gentle question. Who is reacting right now? Is it me, or is it the ghost? You can even give the pattern a name. Ah, that's the panic pattern. There's the old silence. Hello, grandmother's fear. Naming it separates you from it. It makes it an object you can observe, rather than a force that controls you. Third, practice reparenting. When that old fear or anger arises, speak to yourself the way you would speak to a frightened child. If a little child came to you terrified that there wasn't enough food, you wouldn't scream at them. You wouldn't tell them they were being ridiculous. You would hold them. You would soothe them. You would say, it's okay. You are safe. There is plenty. I am here. Become that soothing parent for your own inner child, the one who inherited the fear. Fourth, learn about your family history. Talk to the older generations if you can. Ask them about their lives, their parents, their grandparents. Not to dig for trauma, but to understand their stories. Ask, what was it like for you growing up? What was your mother most afraid of? What made your father laugh? You might start to see the origins of your own patterns. You might hear a story about your great-grandmother Alara and the bread, and suddenly your 3 a.m. anxiety makes perfect, heartbreaking sense. And in that understanding, it loses some of its power. Finally, create new rituals. If you have inherited a pattern of scarcity, create a ritual of generosity. If you can afford it, buy yourself something nice without guilt. Give something away. Practice the feeling of enough. If you have inherited a pattern of silence, practice using your voice. Start small. Say what you want for dinner. Express a preference. Let your voice be heard in safe, small ways. You are teaching your nervous system that it is safe to speak. You are building new pathways in the brain, new circuits in the house. This journey of healing emotional inheritance is ultimately a journey toward profound, self-aware mental freedom. It is the freedom to choose your response rather than being dictated to by the past. It is the freedom to feel your own feelings, distinct from the accumulated grief of your ancestors. It is the freedom to love without the shadows of old losses dictating the terms. When we do this work, we transform. We become more compassionate, not just with ourselves, but with everyone. We see the people in our lives with new eyes. We understand that the angry driver on the road, the critical boss, the distant friend, they are all houses with old wiring too. They are all living out patterns they didn't choose. This doesn't excuse hurtful behavior, but it allows us to meet it with a little more grace, a little less personal reaction. We stop taking things so personally because we understand that most of what people do is about their own ghosts, not about us. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this journey is the realization that we are not just healing ourselves. We are healing our lineage. We are sending love and light backward in time to the grandmother who hid the bread, to the grandfather who couldn't show his tears. By healing the pattern in ourselves, we honor their pain and transform it. We become the ancestor that our descendants will thank. We are the ones who finally learn to hold the anger without becoming it, to feel the fear without being ruled by it, to break the silence with a voice of compassion. We are building a new legacy. A legacy not of unspoken pain and reactive patterns, but of resilience, awareness, and conscious choice. We are building a house where the wiring is strong and safe, where the lights shine brightly, and where the ghosts are not frightening entities in the dark, but honored ancestors whose stories we know, whose pain we have acknowledged, and whose love we have finally fully and freely inherited. So the next time you feel that familiar surge of an emotion that feels too big, too old, too heavy, just pause, take a breath, and whisper to the ghost, "I see you. I feel you, but I am driving now. And I am choosing a new road. This is your life. These are your feelings. And you have the power to make them truly, authentically, and freely your own. The journey is long and it's walked one step at a time, one breath at a time, one moment of awareness at a time. But it is the most important journey you will ever take. It is the journey home to yourself. Thank you for walking with me today. Be gentle with yourselves. You are doing brave work.